Moving ahead with the evening, Professor Arkhit Himan, one of the first alumni of the institution, having done DM gastroenterology, and he proceeded to work as a faculty at PH Chandigarh. The SGPGI was lucky enough, I would say more than a blessed, to have him back in the institution as a newly joined director. Sir joined in the month of February this year, and despite of all his several commitments, which include a lot of COVID work, and he has spared his valuable time to be here with us physically and share his thoughts. I would like to invite him, sir, to welcome the online gathering.
Greetings from Lucknow, and I can see that Professor Bhandari has joined, the former director. When I was here, he was heading the Department of the Urology. I'm here with some nostalgic feelings, and I would like to discuss one by one. I am aware when Professor Bhandari did his first renal transplantation here. Fortunately or unfortunately, the patient had diarrhea and we have to do sigmoidoscopy in that patient. So I remember the kind of the preparation for that patient, not less than in an OT kind of an environment we did the sigmoidoscopy under Professor S.R. Nayak. This is the day where I am really missing Professor Subhash Nayak. He was my mentor, not in the field of the gastroenterology only, but also he improved me in every sphere, every domain. If I am writing a paper, it is all because of him. Because I learned editing by him. Because at that time, Indian Journal of the Gastroenterology was printed from this office. So many things, I can't enumerate each and everything. हिंदी में कहें कि मैं आज जो कुछ भी हूँ या जो कुछ बंदा हूँ, it is all because of him and his team. Because that was my first exposure in the Sanjay Gandhi PGI. I started loving my subject gastroenterology and particularly hepatology at that time. So if you look at my initial papers, beside pH monitoring, endosonography and other things, diagnostic test, that was all related to the liver diseases. Those were the golden days after my training in KGMC at that time. At that time, it was difficult to say that I was lucky or not, but 35 years down the line, I can say those were the golden moments, and those were the moments or the time where the shaping of my career was done. I see the name of Professor Sita Nayak also, that she has joined. Lots of respect to her, ma'am, to you. I distinctly remember one of the journal club when you were having the few papers in your right hand, and just you raise your hand and just say like this, this is the paper of the century. And that was the paper that you presented, was the discovery of the hepatitis C. And you know, we are in the same year now, the 2020, where all three authors were rewarded with the Nobel Prize. So many beautiful moments that I was having here. I don't remember anything which I did not like at that time. It was the beginning of the department. I did my first sigmoidoscopy in the general hospital not in the main hospital. You can imagine that what kind of the environment to begin with, and within 3 years, I would say, everything transformed. And on the third year of my career as a senior resident, our department was judged to be the best in the country within 3 years. And this is all because of Professor Naik. He always carried a diary in his hand. The moment he saw me from a distance, he just opened the page and called me that you have not done this thing or you have to do this thing and this is your additional responsibility that you have to do. So under constant training, advice, monitoring, they all helped me a lot. 8 o'clock in the morning means 8 o'clock. And I retain all those qualities to date. That is something I want to say, and the credit goes to the Professor Naik and his team. Many more things that I do remember here. It is a very proud moment for me today. I am sharing the dais with my teachers. I am sure they will be equally proud of me also. I learned human surgical aspect of a disease, and I have Professor Kapoor here. Dr. S.K. Mishra was the first head of the department. So those were the days when the faculty was chosen not from the India but internationally. And this all, I remember Professor V.B. Sethi, not only as a director of this institute, but as the principal of the KGMC. And I would say that whatever the faculty or the foundation stone at that time, I would say the foundation of the institute, he played a major role. What are the faculty we are having? The people who are sitting on the dais now, they are internationally recognized personalities. So I feel proud that I was trained under their guidance, under their umbrella. They are emotional moments, they have become the emotional moments for me today. There are many things actually. There are lighter aspects also. This is the very, I would say, the director office. We used to come on the second floor to have a pakoda, bread pakoda, and the chai also. And I can see the Ashutosh has joined. Ashutosh was my neighbor. In front of my home, his was there. Many more actually. The first, I can see Anish is already here, but from the abroad. So Ashutosh Tiwari. Now I know that he is the world-renowned urologist. And it is a really happy moment for us, all of us, listening all these things. And when I see all these faces, I go back to my old student days here at Sanjay Gandhi PGI. We have assembled again. I think it is a much needed event that should have taken many decades ago, but it is there than never. It is okay that it is a delayed one, but it is acceptable. Why should we should meet again and again? The one aspect I have already covered as my nostalgic moments of the past. But when we are we are meeting today. Some personally sitting in front of me, others they have joined through video conferencing. Equally important. If you say that it is not only that we have some relationship in the past, but also that we should carry on forward. And for this thing, you have to meet again and again. Whether it is a social event or through video conferencing, or the most important, if we have some kind of the understanding with other department so as to improve over here, or some kind of the exchange program at the level of the education, whatever it may be. So these are the reason I personally feel, though there may be many more, and my other colleagues can point out those one. To make the institute dynamic, when I am saying the dynamicity, I am talking about bringing new things which are not present over here. We did not have the robotics, so we should have over here. We may not be having the techniques newer, and they should be here. Similar to the curriculum, any other aspects of there are so many domains actually. We can collaborate also. So that is very, very important. So meeting again and again, they are very important. Or many more things that I can talk here endlessly. But I personally feel that we should meet at least once every year. And I take this opportunity to extend my warm welcome to everyone. Whenever they come to the India, please come to the SGPGI. Whether they are in an academic institute as a visiting professor or otherwise, they are most welcome. Please come. They would be honored like anything as long as I am here. We will spend time with them. We will spare time for them. Whosoever is coming over here. I think it is nice if we could have some kind of introduction now. Because there are so many faces that I don't recognize, but it doesn't matter. At least we are looking at each other. I think with these words, I would like to stop over here with my extreme gratitudes to all my seniors, my colleagues over here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for these stimulating words. Not only you have enlightened us with your past nostalgic journey of SGPGI, but also giving us the vision of the future. We are so lucky to have you as our director. Thank you so much, sir. Moving ahead with the evening, next is the virtual heritage walk. So, people who are at SGPGI, they remember SGPGI as it was. Surely this walk would be a treat to them. The pictures which are there has been collected over the years by Medical Illustration Unit. I think everybody might remember MIU and Mr. Anil for those ID cards. He has been an immense help along with Mr. Amit, who has beautifully compiled this photographs. And a few of the photographs have been taken up from a coffee table book, which was made by our previous team, Professor Ramnath Mishra. We thank him for his contribution also. The voice has been given by Mrs. Mona Lisa Chaudhary, our public relationship officer, who retired last year, and very kindly she lent her voice to help her out in this. I would request Ms. Mona Lisa Chaudhary.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, on the eve of 40th Foundation Day of SGPGI, I am privileged to welcome you all to join me to walk down the memory lanes and cherish the days gone by.
The story starts about 4 decades ago when, in view of inadequate super specialty medical story starts about 4 decades ago when, in view of inadequate super specialty medical facilities in and around Uttar Pradesh, a concept of creating a tertiary care center was conceived, and thus the foundation stone of the Sanjay Gandhi Postgraduate Institute was laid on the 14th December 1980 in the present King George's Medical University campus by the then President of India, His Excellency Shri Neelam Sanjeeva Reddy. The state government aimed to create a state-of-the-art medical education, training, medical care, and cutting-edge research institution with the motto, "Research enhances the vitality of teaching, teaching lifts the standards of service, and service opens new avenues of investigation." Subsequent to this decision in 1981, a team of medical experts was sent to visit reputed medical institutions of USA, UK, and Sweden. Based on the inputs gathered from the overseas, a project report was prepared, and in 1983, SGPGI-MS was established by an act of Uttar Pradesh government. Initially, the project was to upgrade the various services of KGMU, but after much deliberations, it was decided to create an independent super specialty institute. Hence, a massive hunt for land for this novel institute resulted in acquiring 550 acres of Usar land on the Lucknow-Varanasi highway, about 15 kilometers away from the Lucknow main city. The architectural and construction work was entrusted to UPRNN, Lucknow, and the extensive support by the then leaders of the state helped SGPGI-MS to come up within a very short period with international standards. A generous grant in aid of 3.32 billion yen from JICA was received by SGPGI-MS in the form of myriad equipment both for laboratory and for patient care, which rolled the institute to the track of achieving its goal much beyond expectations. Further, from 1990 to 1995, Nagoya University School of Medicine supported under the Technical Support Program for Transfer of Skills to ensure optimal utilization of the equipments. This program was extended for another 2 years until 1997. The 550 acres of Usar land was developed into a sprawling green campus wherein the state-of-art hospital was aesthetically constructed. The hospital started functioning in 1988 with first 6 super specialty, namely neurosciences, cardiac sciences, renal sciences, gastrointestinal sciences, endocrine sciences, medical genetics, and clinical immunology, along with other subspecialties like pathology, transfusion medicine, nuclear medicine, radiology, etc. The first batch of DM and MCH students were admitted in 1989, and the first convocation was held in 1994, and this much awaited academic celebration became a regular annual event since 1997, witnessed by luminaries like His Excellency Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, Professor Yashpal, Dr. Karan Singh, Professor Richard Ernst, the Nobel laureate Dr. Nobuo Kato of Nagoya University, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, and the list is endless. The telemedicine program was started in 1999, which was then a new and an upcoming concept, but over the years proved of immense help to ailing patients living in remote areas with less or nominal medical facilities. The second phase started with the activation of PMSSY block housing next 6 departments of pulmonary medicine, pediatric surgery, plastic surgery, molecular medicine, and maternal and reproductive health. With the initiation of Trauma Center, the third phase of SGPGI started. The 318-bedded Trauma Center was constructed in Vrindavan Yojana, close to the main SGPGI campus, intensive care units that has been turned into a COVID treating center in the ongoing pandemic period. The third phase also witnessed the initiation of College of Medical Technology, Animal House, new OPT block, Liver Transplant Center, Metallurgy and Stem Cell Center, along with robotics, surgery, etc. The institute has trained nearly 1,000 medical graduates and postgraduates in broad and subspecialties who are working in the different parts of the country and abroad. SGPGI will always be proud of all the directors who were visionary and guided our way to success. And lastly, how can we forget the people we lost along this journey? The 3 pillars of this institute, Professor B.B. Sethi, Professor S.S. Agarwal, and Professor D.K. Chhabra. Some of the notable faculties of this institute, Dr. S.R. Nayak, Professor J.G. Jolly, Professor Vijay Lakshmi Ray, Professor P.K. Ghosh, Professor T.N. Dhole have also left for their heavenly abode. Some of our brilliant residents have also passed away, like Dr. Kanchan Mukherjee, Dr. P.P. Mohanty, and Dr. Kaustubh Mandade, who we lost just last evening. We offer our humble tribute to all of them.
It was indeed not easy to wrap up 4 decades in 5 minutes, but certainly I can say that over the passage of decades, SGPGI MS has lived up to the expectations and made its presence felt in the spheres of patient care, teaching, training, and research, both at national and international arena, and is constantly striving hard to maintain international standards of its multifarious services. SGPGI is pride of not only Lucknow, but the entire Uttar Pradesh. Thank you all for walking with me through this memory lane.
Thank you, Team Telemedicine and Mrs. Mona Lisa, for giving a euphoric view of our SGPGI journey. Now, moving ahead with the main event of the evening, without much ado, I'll hand over the stage to Professor Vikki Kapoor to moderate the evening. Professor Kapoor is from Surgical Gastroenterology Department of the institution, and he has been here since the early days of the institute. And he is one of the few faculties who have seen the evolution of SGPGI from the very beginning. He would have witnessed the growth of generations of alumni by now. Most alumni would remember him, connect with him, and would love to hear from him. So the stage is all yours.
Good evening, everyone. If we think that an institute is known because of its campus and buildings, then we are not right. Because even people who have never been to the institute know the institution. We may think it is because of the patients that we have treated and their relatives and acquaintances. It is because of them that the institute is known. Or is it our research and publications? But if these were the reasons for the name and fame of an institution, how is it that people who have never ever been to even Lucknow or India know the institute? How is it that people who are not even distantly related or known to the patients that we might have treated know the institution? And even lay public, which doesn't read scientific publications, knows the institution. I remember in 1989, when I used to go somewhere and tell people I am in SGPGI, everybody would give a questioning look as to what is SGPGI, where is it? Today, when I go and say I am from SGPGI, I can see a feeling or an expression of awe in their face. In my opinion, if an institution is known all over the country and even abroad, and even to those who are not even related to medical profession or science, it is because of our ambassadors, our alumni. It is they who have brought the name and fame to the institution. If as a consultant, I treat 20 patients in a week, my 100 plus alumni would treat 120 times those patients. And that is how the name and fame comes to the institution. So it's very appropriate that the institute has decided to celebrate this Alumni Day, and the team has chosen 4 very prominent alumni from amongst more than 1,000, as we were told, who have done exceedingly well in their discipline. I'm sure it doesn't mean that there are not others, and I'm sure in the future years, the other alumni who have done well in their fields will figure in this list. So with that, I would request Dr. Saraswat, who's the Chief of Gastroenterology, to kindly introduce the first speaker, that is Dr. Amrinder Puri. Dr. Saraswat, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kapoor. Good evening to all of you who are participating in attending this alumni meet. It's a great pleasure and a great privilege for me to welcome Professor Amarendra Singh Puri to this SGPGI alumni meet, which has been an inspired brainchild of our director, Professor Arkhit Himan, who, as you would have heard him, was among the first batch of alumni from this department of gastroenterology, and who finished his tenure here in 1991. Amarinder graduated from the Christian Medical College, Ludhiana, where he was awarded the Governor's Gold Medal for the best MBBS graduate. After doing his MD from Punjab University, Chandigarh, he joined the second batch of DM students in gastroenterology at SGPGI in 1990. During the 3 years he spent with us in gastroenterology, he impressed all of us with his methodical and systematic approach to patients, as well as his dedicated hard work. After leaving SGPGI, Amrinder joined the Department of Gastroenterology at the GB Pant Hospital, New Delhi in 1998, where he rose to the post of Professor of Gastroenterology in 2002 and became head of the department in 2008. Presently, he is Vice Chairman, Department of Gastroenterology at the Medanta Medicity in Gurgaon. Amrinder is a man of many parts with unusual interests and hobbies such as wildlife photography and penning refined Persian calligraphy. In gastroenterology, his special interests include luminal gastroenterology areas such as inflammatory bowel disease, celiac disease, intestinal tuberculosis, and intestinal infections. During his distinguished career, Amrinder has earned numerous awards, including the Times Healthcare Award in 2017, Dr. H.K. Chutani Award for the Best Teacher in Gastroenterology in 2015, and he was recognized by the Delhi government for his meritorious services in 2014. Not only is he an excellent and methodical teacher, but he is also regarded as a very tough but a balanced DNB examiner. With these few words, I welcome Amrinder once again to this alumni meet. We look forward to hearing in his own words the story of his journey and his memories of the last 28 years. Amrinder?
So thank you, Professor Saraswat, for giving me this opportunity. And if Dr. Rakesh is listening somewhere, Amita is there, he's going to, he will think there's a selection bias. And I personally agree that I'm not sure if I'm the most deserving person who should have given him this mantle to speak on behalf of gastroenterology in the last 30 years or so. But thank you, and I'm greatly honored by this kind gesture of yours. I've arranged my talk, which is about 20 minutes. That is the time allotted to me. After Dr. Vijay Kapoor sent me a mail saying that, can you make it inspirational for the current batch of residents, preferably of all the departments, which is an impossible task. And also for the fresh graduates, if you can give some inspiration to them in their early years. So I think I've taken this quote from Hazrat Inayat Khan when he said that life is a symphony, and the action of each person, he's a part of the symphony, he's playing his own instrument. And I understand the great conductors, like in the Philharmonics, they can identify even one person playing a false note. That's the kind of conductors that they are. So I also think on the same analogy that life is a symphony. And for those of you who are not familiar with the English symphonies or classical music, a symphony has three parts, which is the allegro, which is the initial part and the intense part. And then the middle part is called the andante, which is a slower pace, but the longest one. And the end is called the finale. And what you can see over here is the father of symphonies, Joseph Haydn. And I think he wrote about close to 140 or 150. So if each symphony was a research paper, you can imagine that in 1800, he had written about 150. So on using the same analogy, I think my allegro is in Lucknow, where I started. The andante, where I spent most of my time, was at Delhi, GB Pant. And I'm not going to talk about the finale, which I've just joined about 9 months ago at Gurgaon. So I'll stick to the allegro and the andante. And briefly, just to run you through, I joined as a greenhorn, as SR in 1990. My colleague was Dr. Deepak Agarwal, who's still very much in Lucknow, and I'll allude to him a short while later. I had two seniors, and one has already been on the stage, Dr. Arkhit Himan, and the other was Praveen Salunke, and they were contrasting. So if I had to describe Dr. Dhiman, then the only two words that I can think of is diligent and meticulous. And Salunke was flamboyant and mercurial. He would work, he was so temperamental that if he had to study, then he could study for the whole night, without blinking. And then if he didn't want to do something, he wouldn't do it. So that was the contrast that I had as seniors. SGPGI itself was in a rather infantile stage at that time. And if memory serves me right, I think there were just about 18 beds that we had in gastro. And the faculty was Professor Naik, who was the chief, Dr. Gaurdas and Dr. Vivek Saraswat. And about a year later, or maybe a little more, we were joined by Dr. Rakesh Agarwal, with whom I had a long association, and Dr. Yacha. It's really unfair to allot just one slide on for Professor Naik. He was a totally unforgettable person in my life. And I can't say anything more than he was an astute clinician. He was a motivator, and I saw that when the Kanpur epidemic took place. He was a thorough gentleman, and above all, a fatherly figure, fiercely protective. And I put that because there was an incident when I was a resident, in which he played this role of the fatherly figure being fiercely protective. Somewhere in the middle of my second year, there was an elderly lady about 70 years old, and she happened to come from Balia, which is the extreme eastern part of UP, and she spoke in a dialect and an accent which I couldn't understand anything except three words, which he said, "Mera sir," and gas, and she pointed to the abdomen. And the way she went on talking about gas, I think I got carried away, and I thought, this is clearly she's having some kind of an IBS. And then all was forgotten. I must have seen her once more, but 3 months later, she was discovered to have carcinoma stomach. And the story doesn't end there. Her son was a senior IS officer. And when he got to know that he'd been seen in SGPGI and the diagnosis was missed, he must have been livid. So he wrote to Dr. Naik that this boy must be terminated from the department immediately for dereliction of duty and all that. So Dr. Naik, he called me in his chamber and he said, "Do you remember this patient?" So I said, "Yes, sir. I remember it even now." So he said, "What was the problem?" So I told him exactly that I didn't understand what she was saying. And so then he showed me the letter that the IS officer had written. And he says, "Don't worry, nothing's going to happen." I was shell-shocked. I thought, well, that's the end of my career. I'll have to pack my bags and go off. He says, "As long as I'm there, nothing can happen to you." And that's exactly what happened. I don't think anybody else in the department has any idea about this, but the matter was forgotten and no action was taken against me. I did get a reprimand from him, but that's about all. And he did have a sense of humor. And I remember the days at that time, probably once a month, we used to have these potpourri dinners where everybody had to carry his own one dish. And of course, the drinks were on chief. And he was a great connoisseur of alcohol. So he would be offering different kinds of wines and all different alcohols to everybody. I insisted that everybody must have a drink. And I noticed that first time, second time, third time, each time the only thing I got was whiskey. So on the fourth turn, when we went to his house, I said, "Sir, how is it that you offer everybody else these wines, some Italian wine and he had got some wines from Goa. And all I get is a glass from whiskey from you every time." And he says, "Tu to sardar hai. You will never appreciate anything other than whiskey. To tu chup karke whiskey pure, enjoy the evening." So that's the kind of sense of humor that he had, having been in Chandigarh for so long. 1990 was also the first time I landed up in Lucknow, and I became aware of the term called Ganjing, and that was my first forays into Hazrat Ganj. And of course, the culinary delights of tunde kebab. And I also remember an incident that when I, along with my wife, we went grocery shopping and we went into this big shop in Hazrat Ganj. And my wife said, "I want to buy some basmati." And the shopkeeper looked at her and said, "Are you from Punjab?" So, it was quite a thing that, well, is that how you identify Punjabis? But anyway, and I put here KGMC library specifically for the residents who are here or who just passed out. When I was a resident and you had a seminar coming, then about 2 weeks prior to the seminar, on a Saturday, I would take my scooter and go all the way to KGMC library and take permission from the librarian and then get all your references, make notes, get them back, and then prepare. There was no net, no internet, and not even, the only thing that we probably had was photocopying machines. So now when I take rounds with my residents, if I tell them anything, they open their phone and say, "Sir, up to date is here," and everything that you said may not be true or something. So this is the world that we're moving in. But I still remember those long, it must have been a good 30 kilometers one way, all the way to go to KGMC library, whether it was winter or it was raining, but that was the only day that you had to get your references and prepare for the seminar. So from Allegro, I move on to Andante. I joined as a pool officer in 1993 at GP Pant Hospital. And after serving as a pool officer, did a couple of years here, which I best forgettable, but I finally joined the faculty in 1998. And as they say in the army, rose from the ranks to become the head of department, remained head of department from 2010 to 20, and finally bid adieu just before this pandemic began. And in these last 20 years or so, I must have trained 60 residents, or at least I tried to train them. I was successful in most, but I'm sure there were others who I thought really didn't come up to the mark. But as Professor Saraswat has already alluded, my area of work has been luminal gastroenterology. And as he has already mentioned, I work basically in celiac disease, in IBD and GI tuberculosis. And knowing that we have such a big and a vast, varied audience, I'm not going to go bore you with all my publications, but yes, I just chose two papers out of that. The first one is the infliximab-induced tuberculosis in patients with ulcerative colitis, which was a multi-center study done in 3 centers in Ludhiana, in Delhi, and Mumbai. And this is the reference for most of South Asians, that we know about 8 to 9% of patients who are given Remicade will ultimately develop tuberculosis. And the second paper that I've put here intentionally is the inverse correlation that we showed between celiac disease and Helicobacter pylori. Now, in Delhi, I had seen so many prescriptions where no matter, even if you have dyspepsia, you have functional disease, everybody was treating H. pylori, whether they were adults, children, and I really thought people were baying for the blood of Helicobacter pylori. But in this paper, we actually showed that Helicobacter may be protective. And if you have Helicobacter, then you don't get celiac disease. So this was a paper which I value a lot in my collection. Since Dr. Vikki Kapoor had given me those instructions that he painfully wrote, and he said, you must write something for the fresh pass outs and the current residents. And this is what I have that I have to tell you. So what options do you have when you pass out? When you're a fresh pass out, you have 2 options. You could go into the private sector or you could go into the government sector. The government sector, very few takers, very few options. But again, there are 2 choices. You could go back to your state, or you could go some of the premier institutes like AIMS, PGI Chandigarh, SGPGI. But here, the vacancies are so few and far between that it's like a lottery ticket if you get something here. If you are in the government sector, in all likelihood, you would be in your state, and there are problems associated with the states. But let me start with the private sector. In the private sector, if you decide to go, then you have 3 options. You could go into a solo practice, and the best example of that I can count is my colleague who joined with me, Dr. Deepak Agarwal. You could go into a group practice, or you could join a corporate hospital and start at the bottom of the ladder. So I'll just briefly run through this, but I feel that in your Allegro, which is your initial phase, solo practice should be avoided. And no matter how well you've done in your theory examination, your knowledge is still limited. All you've had is an exposure of about 3 years or so. You have limited experience with therapeutic procedures, so you're not fluent with most of them, and you have a lack of multidisciplinary interaction. So if there is a patient of CA esophagus, you would have to initially make sure if he's operable that he goes for neoadjuvant therapy rather for surgery. So you need to have a collaboration with your radiotherapy department and the oncology department. And more importantly, there is a loss of backup in the case of procedure-related complications. And this is something that I noticed, that so many times at Panths, the residents would send their cases. I would get frantic phone calls from them. Sir, we've had a complication and the relatives are creating a nuisance, or they're very anxious that this complication has occurred. So I said, what did you do? He says, well, I tried to do a needle knife papillotomy and ended up with a retroperitoneal or an interperitoneal perforation. So I don't think it's, the residents always felt needle knife papillotomy is such a simple procedure, just a jab of the needle and the bile duct opens up. So it isn't so easy as it looks. And then when the relatives comes, they always have this grudge against the patient, against the doctor who's caused the complication, and they're not going to go back to you. So these are some of the reasons why you should avoid solo practice. And even if you go into solo practice, make sure that you don't start off with technical procedures which are slightly demanding. I think you should work your way up. And what are the expectations that the resident has who's just a pass out, not a resident, a fresh pass out? Of course, he has the expectations of a lucrative income or a salary. And that's really not so much these days, because there's saturation in the metros. There are limited offers in most of the tier 1 cities, and you will have to join up with somebody. And you expect that wherever you join, there's a complete variety of scopes and equipment. And usually in the smaller centers, all you're going to get is 2 scopes, maybe 3 scopes. And you're wondering, where is your EUS and pH-metry and enteroscopes are not there. So that is a part of your expectations when you join a department, but it's usually not there. And then if you join a state medical college or a smaller center, you want to set up a GI unit there, but you will get precious little support from the government, even if your HOD is willing. And the one example that I can think of now is in RML Hospital. The gastro department was set up almost 10 years ago. But sadly, even today, they don't have inpatient facilities, and they don't have most of the high-end equipment that should be there if it's a tertiary care institute. So these are the problems that you're likely to face. So I would think that all fresh pass outs should pace their career. In the phase 1, you should try and be at a high volume center, and that could be anywhere between 2 to 3 years, and then go on to your consolidation phase and identify your niche area, if you have a niche area. And the third one is at the end of the long phase 2 or the consolidation phase, when you become an expert. And I am an expert in IBD. And for those not aware, an expert is a person who has made all the mistakes that can be made in a very narrow field. So every time when there was a difficult case and I thought this is a Crohn's disease, it turned out to be tuberculosis, and vice versa. So that is what defines an expert. Coming to high volume centers, this is data from GB Pant. So we on an average were having about 2,000 plus admissions. This was in 2014, about 400 more. So 2,500 admissions. So with that kind of exposure, you've practically seen the entire gamut of GI disease. If you're going to a solo practice or a very secluded practice, then most of the things that there would be some things that you missed out. So that's why gaining experience in a high volume center in the beginning of your career is very important. And we have seen that in the evolution of GE in gastroenterology. First, as children, if we had a stomachache, we were taken to the general practitioner and he would give us something. The general practitioner also was the person whom you went if you had a earache, or if you cut your knees, then you get sutured up. He did everything. And then later on, you started going to the physician. Then even subsequently, then the area of specialization, you started going to super specialists. And even in super specialization, there are selected areas. People do only one niche area. So that's the question, when to identify your niche area. And I think there are 4 options. So one is there are gastroenterologists who want to do everything. I call them all-rounders, and they're content in being all-rounders, and they've never identified their niche area. So fair enough, if that's your outlook, follow it. But there are many people who identify their niche area when they're still in residency. And in fact, I remember there was a friend of mine, my colleague, in the 3rd year of the MBBS, he decided that he wanted to be an endocrinologist, and he identified that he must be in Mass General Hospital in US. So this is a 3rd year MBBS student who's already set his goal. So not everybody is so fixed, and we move along. So we would move along whether you want to do endoscopy or you want to do hepatology or luminal gastroenterology. In your posting in 3 years, in your rotation, you would be exposed to each, and then you finally decide. So if you haven't decided during your residency, then it's best in the first 2-3 years of your passing out, you decide. And if you don't do that, then you'll have a midlife crisis. When I was a Panth, we had somebody join us. So I asked him, what is the area that interested him? And And he said he was totally dedicated to hepatology. So he was entrusted the task of setting up the liver clinic. He worked in the liver clinic. We set up a pro forma. The data was being entered into the database. And then one day, about 3 to 4 years later, he comes to me and says, he has a Commonwealth Fellowship. So I said, Commonwealth Fellowship in what? So he says, in stem cell pancreas. So I said, stem cell pancreas? What about the liver? So he says, no, I'm not going to do liver anymore. And he dropped the liver like a hot potato, never went back. So that's the kind of thing one should avoid. Once you've picked up a niche area, develop on that, and I can tell you, you'll go very far. But the question is in gastroenterology. I'm sorry, this is all focused on gastroenterology because I don't think I can cover all the specialties. So I think it's better that I stick to gastroenterology. Is it really easy to identify a niche area? Gastroenterology is perhaps the most difficult branch, the most vast branch. So you have a choice. If you want to do liver, you want to do transplant hepatology. If you want to do lumen gastroenterology, do you want to do IBD, GI motility, GI oncology? If you're more into endoscopy, then it's all third space, or you could go into pancreatic biliary. So these kinds of, somebody who does DM nephrology, I'm sure these options are not so varied and so vast and so different. So we really have to decide which niche area to follow. The most demanding and exciting subspecialty is, of course, therapeutic endoscopy. Everybody wants to be an endoscopist. And currently that really has the highest premium, that everybody thinks that he is the next Nagi Reddy or whoever your hero is. But the problem in therapeutic endoscopy is, one, you need a mentor. You need a mentor who's going to take you through all the procedures which are being done in the department, to discuss the fine aspects, the nuances of each procedure. And if you don't have a mentor, then your learning curves become longer and longer. But if you have a good mentor who stands behind you, like Lord Krishna stood behind Arjun and guides him, guides you everywhere, then your learning curve is much shorter. Of course, you need all the equipment, and that's not always possible. Even in Panth, we had always a paucity, and no matter how hard I tried, I think I count myself as a failure, because I could neither get enteroscopes, neither I could start the ESD and third space. It just started when I was leaving. So that way, until you have the support of your director in the hospital, or you have the support of the government, it's very difficult to procure equipment. You also need a very healthy environment around you, people who encourage you. And if you go wrong, then there's always the surgical backup, which is there. And most importantly, it's the time. So nobody becomes an expert in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. It's a very long, drawn out procedure. I'm sure you're familiar with this learning curve, which has on your y-axis the complication rate, and on the x-axis is the time. And you can see that with time, the complication rate really comes down. So this is the classic learning curve, but the slope is very variable. There are people who take to therapeutic endoscopy like a fish to water. So their slope comes down very quickly. And there are people whom the slope never becomes a slope, it just remains a straight line. So recognize the fact that you may not be very skilled in therapeutic endoscopy, and might be appropriate that you go into some other. That's just a suggestion. The number of procedures is important that you do for each procedure before you become an expert. So an expert in EUS is not necessarily an expert in third space. So you start all over again with the learning curve. And there's no single number to determine expertise. Of course, the societies say after 50 ERCPs or maybe 100 ERCPs, you're an expert. But even that, there's no fixed rules for that. And of course, there are medical legal aspects. At Panth, I was a part of the government committee that was being set up. And there we had all these consumer cases coming in. and a lot of them were related to therapeutic endoscopy. And what struck me was the fact that a lot of, in many cases, the procedure was not indicated. So when the procedure is not indicated, the person is a novice, the likelihood of ending up in a complication is very high. In your early years, after you pass out, you might be going from one center to the other center because you're not satisfied. And that's a very depressing period. It happened with me. I wasn't sure what I was doing. There wasn't any government jobs. And that's the important time to know that you are your own inspiration. Nobody's going to come and say, no, 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 you can do it. It is, the inspiration has to come from within. You are your own solution and you are your own motivation. So don't give up. Believe in yourself. Even if you're having a rough time in your initial phase, stick there, stick at the wicket, as they say in cricket, and I'm sure you'll come out successful. Last couple of slides are on the current GI scenario in India, and this is something that I feel very strongly about. I put a cartoon diagram here, and this is in general, not only my feeling, but in general, the feeling everywhere that the government sector, not only in GI, but maybe in many specialties, is going down and down. And it's the corporate or the private sector which is going up. And the reasons for this, it's not rocket science at all. And this graph that I brought here, it shows you the health expenditure as a percentage share of the GDP. And I'm not an economist, but I can tell you that any country which has a health share is about 9 to 10% deserves to be called a developed country. And you can see the gray column tells what is the mandatory expenditure on health that must occur as a proportion of the GDP. So for US, it is about 14%. And the orange column tells you which is voluntary over that. So even if you take the mandatory government expenditure, for US, it's 14%. Switzerland is about at least 8%. Combined is about 12%. In France, Belgium, they're all about, even UK is just touching 10. But as even countries like Turkey are way ahead of us. So that is a depressing statistic. And until we improve our health and expenditure, we are not going to improve or upgrade the government sector. And these are the figures for India. So this is the slide which shows that from 2010 to 2018, we're not even touching, we're below 2%, more in the range of 1.7. I think now it's gone up to 1.9, but that's what tells you the whole story as to why the government sector is lacking. I worked in the government sector for 25 years, and I think this is the main reason that barring a few autonomous institutes, there is the amount of money coming into tertiary care hospitals is really, with barring few exceptions, is abysmally low. And what is even more depressing is that there's no significant change in the last decade as shown here. And more recently, this is the data from Delhi. So this is the government, the Aam Aadmi Party. It's not political, but the Aam Aadmi Party won this election on two main planks. One was their excellent healthcare, which they advertised, and the second was the school education. And I'm sorry to say that in this pandemic, it was completely exposed. And even as late as November 2020, when it was almost at a second peak, it was 4 deaths per hour in Delhi. And these are the figures that I managed to get from a source. So I can even now make a prediction that things are not going to change in the government sector very soon. And therefore, going into the government sector, you must be aware of the shortcomings. And having said that, this is a quotation from Niels Bohr, who said, prediction is a very difficult thing, especially when it's about the future. But I think I'm going to be right. Until there is a paradigm shift in the government, in the health sector, nothing much is going to change. Of course, there's been a changing perspective of GI in India. In 1990, when I joined SGPGI, the top 3 centers for for gastroenterology were AIMS, PGI Chandigarh, and GB Pant Hospital. And I think today, if anybody asks which is the best center for GI in India, it's hands down AIG Hyderabad, or another good hospital equally equipped is the Mangeshkar Hospital in Pune, and third maybe Medanta Medicity. I'm not saying that because I'm working there, but the kind of equipment that we have at Medanta is better than practically any other private hospital. So as you can see that all the advanced centers, GI centers in India are in the private sector. That is depressing for somebody who spent his entire career in the government sector. And the reason for that is the lack of cutting edge technology that is there in the government sector and is very much there in the private sector. And also the overall patient satisfaction that they get because the kind of nursing care that they can offer. So therefore it is totally a case of private sector overtaking the government sector here. And then I asked myself, why is the government sector lagging? And why is the private sector doing well? So if I was to give the example of AIG Hyderabad, they have a large dedicated faculty, nearly 10 people there. And they have this concept of niche area. So Rupa Banerjee will do only IPD. Rupa Jyoti will do only pancreas. Laktakya will do, who's also from SGPGI, will do only third space. So each person has identified himself with a niche area and taking it to new heights. Of course, they have the cutting edge technology. They have active participation with the industry. Any new scope that comes, any new device that comes, the industry wants to test it there. And of course, they have an excellent work environment. And I want to put this last thing as no interference or obstruction by the government. I can tell you that when I was the HOD at GB Pant, we needed ERCP scopes to be renewed. So I had gone to the secretary and he wouldn't pass it. And then when I met him personally, he said, "Aapko kyun chahiye? Aap operation karaiye stones ke liye? Why do you want ERCP scopes and what is all this?" So imagine that you have a health secretary who has no concept, who's not willing to listen. And it took a lot of convincing from my director at that time, who appraised him that this is now not how it's done anymore. And if you have bile duct stones, they can, in half an hour, you can be out with an ERCP. So that's the kind of roadblocks that you're going to see in your career. So does it mean that this is the end of the road for government hospitals? Certainly no, because high volume centers, these are all high volume centers. You can hone in your surgical skills, endoscopic skills by the sheer numbers. You see the entire spectrum of disease, and that's where you hone in your clinical skills. You learn to make your own decisions. And if you're working at the bottom rung in a corporate hospital, you just do as what boss says. And of course, there is optimum utilization of available resources. I had to work in the narrow constraint. This is what I can order from the hospital, and this is what the patient has to be sent to the private sector. So it wasn't, you order a battery of tests and it doesn't matter because there is a third party insurance. So somebody else is paying for it. And of course, there were opportunities for improvisation. I tried my level best to get cholangioscopy at GB Pant, failed. And then what we started doing was, in cases of very widely dilated bile ducts and choledochal cysts, do a large EPT and use a smaller scope and just go in directly with the front viewing scope. So that was improvisation and many other episodes like that. So lastly, what is the making of a good doctor in the era of millennials? I think clinical medicine is still an art. It's not only a science. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of good history taking and a good physical examination. And to give you one anecdote, just before I left the last batch, we had a 40-year-old man who had anemia and a diarrhea. And because I was working in luminal gastroenterology, so my residents always think it's celiac disease. And of course, the celiac workup was negative. So they decided to do a colonoscopy. And I was doing the colonoscopy, and as per habit, I did the PR first, and I found a growth there. So I called the resident. So I said, "Did you do a PR?" He said, "No." So I said, "Why didn't you do a PR?" He said, He was the topper from KGMC in MBBS and MD. And he said, sir, in KGMC, if you're doing medicine, you don't have to do PR. It's only for the surgeons. So this is the abysmal state that we've landed ourselves into. The third point that I want to make is when you're stuck with a problem, reach out to others, your colleagues, your seniors. I'm sure they will help you out and give you a solution which you hadn't thought of. Keeping abreast with medical literature is no longer a problem with the net. Google Devta is there. Everything is available with a click of a button. And of course, compassionate patient care. And the last message is the patients don't care how much you know. I went through this. The patients don't care how much you know until they know how much you care for them. I think that's the bottom line. And my last slide is actually for Dr. Saraswat, because he knows I have an interest in bird photography. So this is the white-collared kingfisher in Andaman. It comes from the genus Halicon. And Halicon means a period of tranquility, peace, and joy, usually in the past. And here, undoubtedly, I can say that my Halicon period was 1990 to 1993 when I was at SGPGI. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I also take this opportunity to extend my greetings to the surgical colleagues, Professor Kaushik, Professor Vinay Kapoor, Rajan Saxena, and my co-residents at that time. I can't name all of them, but thank you very much.
So it's my proud privilege to introduce Ashutosh to you all. So generally these introductions are all formal, but I'll begin with a few minutes of informal note, as we have been, as was alluded to earlier, the initial few alumni from this institute. So Ashutosh joined with me sometimes in July of 1987, 88. And I was already here as a hospital service senior resident, and as the first ever actually in the institute. And then we started our journey together, and finally we started our MCH from the 1st January 1989 under the mentorship of Professor Mahen Bhandari. And he is here today. It is exhilarating to see him. And I must let you all know that the department which he started was always one of the best. And this year, after the NEET started, the third consecutive year, we are having students within the first 10 of the merit. And this year it is number 1, 2, 3, and 5 have joined the Department of Urology as SGPGI. With this, let me tell you about Dr. Tiwari, who did his undergraduate training from GSVM Medical College and had an illustrious medical career with 17 gold medals for outstanding performance in the university exams. And of course, we did our MCH together here, and then he immediately went to US after that and started his fellowship in urologic oncology at University of California, San Francisco, subsequently at University of Florida. In 2004, he completed his urology residency from Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. While at Henry Ford, he was part of the team that performed the first robotic radical prostatectomy, I think, in the entire world, not only in the United States, but in the entire world. Today, he is the chairman of Milton and Carol Petrie Department of Urology at Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and is a world-renowned specialist in prostate cancer. As director of the department, he leads a team committed to improving prostate cancer treatment, research, and education. He has performed by now more than 8,000 robotic radical prostatectomy surgeries. And his lab is currently working on unlocking the genomic causes of prostate cancer and translating genomic information to practical physician application through imaging. In 2012, he was awarded the American Urological Association Gold Cystoscope Award, which is given to somebody who within 10 years of his completing residency and has done a significant work in the field. Ever since, he has held several leadership positions, both at domestic and international platforms. I'll tell you that he has a special attachment with and great personal affection with me. And we have been associated not only during our journey during the MCH and pre-MCH days, but also later on as well. I'd been going to US almost every 2 or 3 years, or maybe less than that. And practically every time we would meet. And when he was doing his MLE, said on the lighter side, while reading psychiatry. So I used to prompt him. He would say, I can't read this subject. Then we will do it together. Like, I'll ask him questions from psychiatry. So we have that kind of relationship, and later on everything we all know, and to the top position in the entire globe, which he holds today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am sure that today most of the senior faculty members, the alumni who are connected, would like to hear from something about his phenomenal work and maybe an occasional anecdote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anish. Thank you, Dr. Dhiman. It's been a true honor for me to be part of this alumni event with Sanjay Gandhi. For the current faculty, current residents, and the students who are there, I can sum you up in one slide that everything you need to learn to do what you need to do in your medical career, I think you will learn in these 2 or 3 or 4 years while you are in Sanjay Gandhi. After that, it's just coming back to the same principles, coming back to the same advices which your mentors gave, and just reinventing yourself and adjusting the course. I have been very lucky. I had a chance to be the first batch of an MCH from Sanjay Gandhi. And as Professor Dhiman mentioned, he was my neighbor. Everyone distinctly remembers him for his passion for medicine, his excellence in taking care of patients, but his understated and humble approach towards life. Dr. Radha was a close friend, and I still remember his smiley response to the questions which we used to ask. Every time we had a GI consult, he was the one who was taking care of things. And the transplant patient he mentioned, I will get back to it a little later. Professor Dhiman, this is an outstanding start which you have done, because this is one way to magnify the impact which a lot of us, 200, 300, thousands of us, which are all over the world, we have our roots very closely tied to Sanjay Gandhi, and we really owe our growth and everything to that institution. So the fact that you are initiating this new model, I think it is really commendable for you. Thank you. I had just finished MS surgery from GSVM Medical College under leadership of Professor Tarachand, and my examiner was Professor S.P. Kaushik at that time. He was kind enough to give me a boost, and with his motivation, I ended up doing a pool officership at All India Institute of Medical Sciences with another legendary figure, that was Professor Samiran Nandi, who was a England-trained surgeon who came back to AIIMS and brought in academia and surgery together. Very soon, however, I realized that my passion was towards urology, and I just walked in to Sanjay Gandhi sometimes in mid 1988. And that is where the start of my journey started in urology, and in one single individual who changed the course of my trajectory was Professor Bhandari. I cannot forget the first interaction I had with him, the administrative block where Professor Dhiman's office is. That is where Dr. Bhandari was unpacking his boxes which had just come from JIPMER. And I had no appointment, no emails, no cell phones, no secretaries to coordinate. I just had a motorcycle, so I drove from Kanpur to Lucknow. And there I was knocking on his door. Then he was almost on a table trying to hit the fan so that the fan can start moving, and all the boxes were around. He was so kind. He was so inspirational. He sat down, he listened to me, and he said, you know what? I have just come yesterday, and you really want to be here because the department doesn't exist. But then you said, okay, let's meet maybe in 1 month time. If you are still interested, and if I'm still there, we will talk about it. And that led me to come back again in about a month time. He said, okay, come over. You already have a pool officer's job. Why don't you come over and start here? We don't know whether there'll be MCH or not. And if anything, there will be only one seat of an MCH. And we already have a star resident who had joined us, and that was Professor Anish. So I said, okay, we moved in there. He truly is a visionary. He sees things far beyond before they are happening. And he has an attitude, why not? And then that why not is what has led to urology department at Sanjay Gandhi to become one of the premier institutions in the world. And I was lucky to be his part of 2 first MCHs at Sanjay Gandhi. I distinctly remember that he saved me from getting into the principal's office because I was caught driving his own car in the main hospital lobby because we were moving cystoscopes and PCNL equipments from the general hospital to the main hospital, and there was no other way. So I was driving the car in the lobby, and Dr. Sethi's team caught me. I was in trouble, but then I was bailed out by Dr. Bhandari saying that, you know what, there is no other way to do a special operation next week, and he was just helping me. I also remember the first transplant. The first cadaveric transplant was done under his leadership at Sanjay Gandhi. And my only role was that I was from Kanpur and I had a motorcycle. And I could get to the recipient possibly faster than the phone or anything else could happen. So my role was that. And after that, we somehow managed to get that patient there. The first successful transplant was there, first PCNL was there. So many firsts happened under his leadership. And then he and I continued collaborating together, and he and I wrote a paper on transplant and whether the transplant is only 100-year-old. And he was trying to bring in that Lord Shiva had done the transplant first time in the Ganesha's thing. So that paper was published, and that is one of my prize papers with Professor Bhandari. Not only that, Professor Bhandari was instrumental in my career. His wife had a role. Dr. Sushma Bhandari, I can owe my getting fellowship at UCSF, which was next part of my journey, goes credit to her because we didn't have phones and PGI at that time. And somehow I had written letters to many people, and one of them was kind enough to call from San Francisco to PGI to Dr. Bhandari's home. And we had an internal phone. So Dr. Bhandari's wife had one phone with an international call, and she plugged in with the internal phone with my apartment, and I could first time talk to the residency director and the fellowship director, and the atmosphere was like a family. The attendings, the faculty, they really cared for us, and we were very lucky. And Dr. Srivastava, who is the chair now, was not only my colleague, he actually taught me how to do cystoscopies. There were times I will not know which end of the scope used to go inside the body. I was a general surgeon. I had never seen the complex urology, and he was a very well-trained urologist at that time. And there have been many episodes in which I used to call the attendant to go and fetch for Dr. Anish so that I can find the stent which I was supposed to remove. And Dr. Anish would come and very quietly, in his manner, he will take it out. Anish and I have stayed connected forever. He was one of the teachers as a colleague for me, and the rest of the team of my fellow residents. This is the team of Divakar and Anil Elhans and Gautam Banerjee and Rakesh and Vijay and Vinod Mishra. So these were the three batches with the first, second, and third batch. And they did a lot together. We never had a better time. We would work hard, but we were never tired. We were never sad, and each one of us was taking care of each other. Dr. Rawat and Dr. Anand Kumar and Dr. Rakesh Kapoor were other three faculty, and we could see the wisdom which was coming from PGI Chandigarh and All India Institute of Medicine, and we were lucky to have a combination of knowledge by 2 or 3 premier institutions in the country. I finally graduated in 1992, and Dr. Bhandari's help got me a fellowship first in Royal Liverpool Hospital for the transplant. But that was not my destination. I wanted to come to United States. And the first call which had come was by Dr. Perry Narayan, who was a faculty at UCSF and also at the VA hospital. I became part of his team. Very soon, he got appointed as a chief at Shands Hospital in Gainesville, Florida. And before he moved me. I transitioned from being a surgeon to, for a few years, not doing surgeries at all. And this was my prized office. My wife's picture is there, my son, my daughter, all of who came with me to United States in 1993. And this is my office. I got quite involved with research, and Dr. Narayan was the instrumental force in teaching me that. Evolved from a surgeon to starting to talk about artificial intelligence and neural network. Then the next shift happened in my career. And the history goes again back to the time I had spent at Sanjay Gandhi. One of the visiting professors was Dr. Menon. Dr. Menon was chair at UMass when he had visited us at Sanjay Gandhi, and this is a picture from that time. And then he just moved to Henry Ford Hospital as a chief. As the chair of urology at Henry Ford Hospital, he was looking to recruit some people, and I was available. At that time, I was not thinking about doing any further training in United States. I had plans to go back to India. And Dr. Menon was looking for a researcher and a surgeon scientist. And I got a position with the Josephine Ford Cancer Center there. And Dr. Menon was kind enough to offer me that. He became my mentor. And during that time, things evolved. He wanted to change from an open radical prostatectomy to a minimally invasive prostatectomy. And that led me to go and spend about a month in Paris with the straight laparoscopic surgeon like Bertrand Guillaume and Valencian. I learned the straight laparoscopy, came back, a robot came, and Mr. Vaticuti endowed the department with some significant funding, and Da Vinci Robotics started. I just distinctly remember first 1,000 cases, which I did at Henry Ford. It used to take almost whole day, but by the time I was leaving, we were able to do 4 to 6 cases every day. That time at Henry Ford, under leadership of Dr. Menon, being part of the robotic program, and then finishing my residency at that during the same time in parallel, led me to become involved with the surgical part of it. So I learned about the data and the science and a lab before I came to Henry Ford. I got involved with making the surgical drawings and understanding the fundamentals of what operating field and operating science should look like. That led me to get quite involved with the first few and possibly many critical papers on the robotic prostatectomy. And these are the papers in early 99 and 2000s. This passion towards anatomy also led me to lay down the foundation for evolving the anatomical studies for prostate cancer using a robotic platform, moving on to the same theme which Dr. Patrick Walsh had done for the open radical prostatectomy. Dr. Jay Smith and I got together, who was the chair at Vanderbilt, and we wrote a book on the robotics and urological surgery early on. We wrote a book on prostate cancer, a comprehensive perspective. I became a professor professor and endowed chair at Weill Cornell Medical School. And at that time, I got involved with developing the robotic technique. I will bring my discussion towards the field a little bit, but I will keep it general for everyone to understand. Prostate cancer is one cancer in which a surgeon gets judged not by what he or she takes out, because we have to take the cancer out. But this is an organ which is very closely attached to the nerves which control the sexual function and the muscles which control urinary control. So having a negative margin is critical, but doing that with preserving a sexual and urinary function was another very important milestone. So these are three operations in one. Surgeon has to be a cancer surgeon along with a neurosurgeon and a reconstructive surgeon. So we started doing some fundamental work on redefining the anatomy, and we came up with the concept that actually this nerve plexus around the prostate may not be just like a rope, but like a hammock. And we developed techniques in which we can delicately dissect out the cancer and still maintain and preserve the sexual function. This is one of the videos from that time. We recently evolved into developing a newer way of preserving the anterior control structures, which allow urinary control to come back much earlier. And this is known as a hood. And this is one of the drawings which me and my lab did. Dr. Patrick Walsh was another motivating figure for me all along, and having gotten involved in a prostate cancer journey, he is a legend. And just a couple of years ago in 2017, he and I reconvened back together, and it was a true honor for me to give him a Lifetime Achievement Award at New York. I have to say that when I was in Sanjay Gandhi, I knew a little bit about urology, I knew a little bit about prostate cancer, but I had never done a radical prostatectomy. I'd never seen a robot. I'd never heard about artificial intelligence. But what I had heard and learned there, that anything is possible. Just put your mind together, think about the ways it can be done, never be outworked, and things will happen. And that exact recipe has brought me so far, and I'm really excited. But there was an inflection point. Very soon I realized that like in any cancer, not everything can be tackled by a knife. And in my case, by a robot. And as a surgeon scientist, I cannot just delegate everything else to someone else to tackle or figure it out. And we realized that there is a lot which can be learned at the molecular level, at the genomic level. So these are the first 7 patients who ever had their whole genome sequenced. And I was part of that team. These were all my patients. I had insight to kind of collaborate with the team members, and we did the whole genome sequencing and realized that prostate cancer may be of different biological method. They may be different. One may be sugar addicted, other may be hormone addicted, and third may be an inflammation driven. And understanding what kind of a driver this individual patient has may prevent cancer from coming back. Then came a concept about imaging, and we got quite involved with the preoperative and then intraoperative imaging, realizing that a multiphoton microscopy and a multiparametric MRI both can help us in making our surgeries more precise. And this work started happening in my lab. So evolving from a pure surgeon to a surgeon scientist, leveraging our knowledge about the data sciences, artificial intelligence, evolving into the genomics, then into the imaging, and then finally into the immunotherapy programs, has helped me in keeping this program my own caliber, my own knowledge at the ahead of the curve. And now of late, we have been looking at the mind-body connections with our own Indian physician scientist Deepak Chopra to see if mind and body and inflammation and diet and exercise can have an impact in the cancer outcome. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that what you are learning in Sanjay Gandhi is critical for your rest of the life. You just need to figure it out, how to evolve, how to keep in touch with your mentors, how to relearn, how to reinvent yourself. Tools you already have. You just need to put in an energy, sometimes sit down and kind of reflect upon, are you going into the right direction? Good things are bound to happen. And in my case, I've had a different kind of a journey. I very often was known as Jack of all, master of none, very early in my career. And when I came to United States, I started thinking about kind of reversing that mindset. And I started thinking about one organ, and that organ became my life's calling. And I want you to remember one thing, that the hedgehog concept is that there is a story goes out that the fox and a hedgehog animal, which you can see on the left, have been fighting with each other for a long time. Fox knows many skills, tries to attack on that hedgehog many different ways from different angles. Hedgehog is very simple, knows one thing. And that one thing is that that hedgehog can roll down and put his spikes up. And when the spikes are up, no one can touch, no fox can touch. So that's been my model. I will not do a kidney transplant. I will pass on a kidney stone to my colleagues. The stricture urethras will be handled by someone else. The bladder cancer, I have Peter Wicklund. But when it comes to prostate, that's what I know. And I also know there is a lot more I don't know right now. And as a surgeon scientist, I want to collaborate. I want to learn from other experts, from the basic scientists, from the immunotherapists, the trialists, the imaging experts. And that is what the mindset I would encourage the new residents, the new faculty, the new fellows to have. You can evolve and be a surgeon scientist, and that has been my journey. I was also given a cue towards that what can we do for Sanjay Gandhi, which has given us literally everything which we have become. And I would say with Professor Dhiman and the leadership of the institution, many of us can help, at least from an international standpoint. There isn't such a luminary faculty, luminary alumni from India itself and from UK and other parts of the world. But from an international and in a US standpoint, we could be your ambassadors. We could help you in raising funds for doing fellowships, and we can help in establishing professorships. I have listed my email, my personal cell phones right there. If someone has a question, someone never has a dream, someone just wants to pick up my mind, I'll be happy to be available. And I will conclude this session by thanking Anish, thanking Dr. Bhandari, thanking all my mentors, and especially Dr. Dhiman for having this vision of establishing this new initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you very much. And I think it's a good coincidence that Amrinder spoke first and talked of creating a niche for yourself. And then Ashutosh has very suitably given an example that how he found his niche and has excelled in that process. Now I would request and invite Dr. Shubha Phadke, who is the Chief of Medical Genetics, to introduce our next speaker, which is Dr. M. Naveed. Dr. Shubha, please.
Very good evening to you all. Respected Dr. Dhiman, Dr. Mishra, and dear Punita. Thank you very much for this emotional event which is taking us down the memory lane. So today here I am to introduce my dear friend and my colleague since 1989. So we were co-students here. You can see the picture of Dr. Naveed as a student who was a trained, very well trained pediatrician from Bangalore when he joined SGPGI as a PhD student. I think he was the first PhD student of SGPGI MS. He was a star student and continued to shine in the field of genetics and thalassemia since then. So when I started thinking about talking about Dr. Naveed and those times in 1989 and 1990, I realized that this was, SGPGI was not even in infancy. It was like probably just born. And my association with Dr. Naveed, I can say that we are sort of, I can describe as dizygotic twins reared apart. What I mean is that both of us, when we started learning genetics, developing, growing, and differentiating to become medical geneticists in 1989, it was, the field was just, we were sort of in the fetal life of medical genetics in India. And our mother department of medical genetics, this was like a primary mother who has lots of resources but no experience. So the department has lots of equipments, but neither we nor there were many teachers who knew everything about genetics and so on. So long ago, in very early of our studentship, we realized that if we do some lab work, and Dr. Agrawal's message was that every clinician should do some lab work. So we realized that if we do some lab work, then the diagnostics will be established and then we can really become medical geneticists. So Dr. Naveed at that time chose to work in the area of thalassemia because thalassemia and hemophilia were the commonest and are the commonest genetic disorders. We were getting lots of patients and there was no center in all over Uttar Pradesh to take care of these patients and provide diagnostic facilities. So Dr. Naveed took the mission to establish HPLC and mutation detection for beta thalassemia, and I chose to work on chromosomal disorders. So this helped him, though we retrospectively we can look back at that struggle of getting those investigations established and the technology established was very, very difficult. But now we can look back and understand that how important that struggle was that polished our minds as well as brains. So this helped Dr. Naveed to complete his PhD in beta thalassemia. And then after doing his PhD, he also joined as DM medical genetics students in 1992. So a pediatrician who did PhD and then DM in medical genetics, and that too both from the same institute. I think this is a record, and especially a record in India in SGPGI, probably nobody has yet broken. So with his excellent training in beta thalassemia, his experience in diagnostics and patient care, and especially passion for children with thalassemia. In general, passion for the, a lot of commitment to the patient care, he joined thalassemia specialist in Dubai. And he is a consultant geneticist in Ministry of Health and Prevention in UAE now. He was earlier, he worked as a director of planning and operations of SBK Foundation. Most important of because of his excellent experience in thalassemia, he is director of operations at the regional office of Thalassemia International Federation, Central Arab Genomic Studies. He established prenatal diagnosis facilities in Dubai. He is adjunct faculty at Dubai Medical College and UAE University. He introduced genetics at Dubai Medical College and started clinical genetics services in Dubai Health Authority in 1996. He is also a consultant geneticist and director of UAE Genetic Disease Association. And most important, he is also a member of Thalassemia International Federation Medical Advisory Board. So you can see that he is our ambassador in not only in UAE and Dubai, but also all over world. So with these words, I would like to remember Dr. Naveed's old photographs and also remember his hard work, his perseverance, and his passion for research, which really helped to make basic of thalassemia management as well as thalassemia diagnostics in SGPGI and our department. So because we shared, though we are in touch, but because of our sharing of SGPGI and medical genetics department struggle of establishing a new specialty and working in a lab-based specialty was really an experience. Both of us learned from each other, and I really fondly remember Naveed about taking care of patients, starting first patient support group, and also having blood donation camps for patients with beta thalassemia, and lot more to say. So I will request now Dr. Naveed to share his journey afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vijay Kapoor, Dr. Shubha, for the kind introduction. Thank you, Professor Dhiman, Professor Mishra, for inviting me to speak today. It's an honor, and I'm very pleased to be with you all. The progress I have made in the field of thalassemia starts from SGPGI, and that's what I'm planning to present in my talk. Very briefly about me, I did my MBBS from Bangalore Medical College, DCH from Mysore Medical College. Then to complete the rest of the requirements of DNB Pediatrics, I was in St. John's Medical College. Then I did PhD Genetics from SGPGI. After that, DM Medical Genetics. And after leaving SGPGI, I did my MBA in Healthcare Services and also postgraduate diploma in Hospital Management. I am in genetics because of Professor Manorama Thomas. She was the head of genetics and also anatomy at St. John's Medical College. When I was doing DCH, I learned and also did about 100 perinatal autopsies. One of them turned out to be a rare syndrome. I took those histopathological slides from Mysore to Bangalore to St. John's Medical College for second opinion with Professor John Thomas, the husband of Manorama Thomas. Dr. Thomas helped me to decipher the syndrome, and he also encouraged me to publish it. When the paper got accepted in American Journal of Medical Genetics, Professor Manorama Thomas was more happy than me. She visited my dad and convinced me that I should do further studies in genetics, and that's how I landed in SGPGI the cold winter of 1988 to give the first entrance examination. Professor S.S. Agarwal, what can I say? He is my mentor. I learned many things from him other than science and genetics. He was a father figure for me, and I always remembered him whenever I had any problem. PhD during SGPGI days was not easy. I had many fears. First of all is the career opportunities after finishing PhD. The uncertain duration of PhD, it could be 3 years or it could be 5 years. Most of the times you are in the lab, So there was a fear of losing clinical skills. And I had to survive on a fellowship of 1,800 rupees for the next 3 to 5 years. The biggest fear was Professor S.S. Agarwal himself. During those days, I met several people seeking guidance, and all of them have got something to say in common. Please don't take Professor S.S. Agarwal as your main guide. He's a perfectionist. He had many students in the past and nobody could complete under him. But that was a challenge for me. Rather, it is a motivation for me to do PhD. That became a motivation for me to do PhD. And I'm glad I became the first PhD student under Professor S.S. Agarwal. I gave many proposals to Professor S.S. Agarwal for my PhD thesis work, but he insisted that I have to take thalassemia for my PhD work. I did not realize the importance of this disease until I moved out of SGPGI. My co-guide was Professor Sarita Agarwal. I think she is here today. Thank you, Professor Sarita Agarwal, for all your help during the PhD period. My PhD topic was clinical, biochemical, and molecular characterization of thalassemia. If you ask me what is the most important out of all I have done in PhD times, is the HPLC work. This picture is very dear to me, not because of the instruments you see, because of the man who is standing next to me, Dr. Nagaraju. He is one of the guest speakers today. He will be speaking after me. He was my shadow, he was my guide, and he was encouraging me all along my PhD days. We were together in SGPGI for almost 6 years. A great friend indeed. Part of my thesis work was molecular characterization of thalassemia. In those days, there was a lack of expertise in molecular genetics, and also we didn't have the right equipments to do molecular work. Two teachers I cannot forget. One is Dr. Vijay Aznik. That time he was a PhD student at NYU. He was on a visit to Lucknow, that was his home. He showed us that you don't require high-end equipments to do molecular work. With 2 water baths and 1 heating block, he showed how to do PCR. We also learned from him several techniques in bacterial genetics. The second teacher is Professor Yukio Hathori, head of genetics at Yamaguchi University, Japan. He visited SGPGI with his team in 1991, and we learned a lot of molecular techniques under him. I'm continuing to be associated with Professor Hathori even today, and I've done several projects under him. I'll be describing it at a later after a few slides. By the time I finished my PhD work, still the molecular lab was not fully established. There was no PCR machine in SGPGI. I had to take the samples to Delhi to the ICMR lab to finish the PCR experiments. And one good friend, Dr. Purnima Kishore, helped me in these PCR experiments. Professor Agarwal had nominated Professor I.C. Verma and Professor C.M. Gupta from CDRI as external doctoral committee members. I still remember the final doctoral committee where Professor I.C. Verma and Professor C.M. Gupta were arguing with Professor Agarwal that Naveed has done enough, let him submit the thesis. But Professor Agarwal was not happy. He sent my HPLC work to US to Professor Heisman for second opinion, and my thesis to Professor Bernadette Model. She is regarded as the mother of thalassemia. One of the greatest compliment I have received is from Professor Model. After several years after leaving SGPGI, I met her in one of the Thalassemia conference that was at Malta. After her guest lecture, I introduced myself. I'm Dr. Naveed from India. She gave a pause and then she asked, "Did you get your PhD?" I think this is the greatest compliment I have in my career so far. An Young Scientist Award from Indian Society of Human Genetics and a publication in Indian Journal of Medical Research helped me to convince Professor Agarwal, and I could complete PhD under him. Other than doing DM medical genetics at SGPGI, I was involved with several other activities. One of them was helping to start a parent support group for thalassemia patients and their families. This is the file picture of the first meeting we had with parents and patients at SGPGA. This is the first blood donation camp at SGPGA organized by Thalassemia Society of UP. One of the star attraction during one of the meetings of Thalassemia Society. In the initial period, when there was no pediatrician in the staff clinic, I was helping SGPGI as a volunteer. In fact, I liked it because instead of just working in the lab all the time, I had some time to go to the clinic, okay, to see patients. Till Dr. Pali Bhattacharya joined, I was the pediatrician in the staff clinic. I took my first job in Dubai in February 1996. I joined the newly opened Genetic and Thalassemia Center. I started the first genetic clinic in Dubai and also initiated the prenatal diagnosis with the help of Dr. Nagraju from Nanavati Hospital and the team from UCL. And the first cord blood bank, first PGD, and a first cord blood transplantation for thalassemia patient in 2002 with the help of Dr. David Denison, and transplant was done at Muscat. One of the significant progress that happened in the last 20 years in Dubai, in UAE in particular, is start of prenatal diagnosis in this sensitive community. After starting the first genetic clinic in 1996, I kept on counseling the patients the importance of prenatal diagnosis and prevention. But it was not until 1998 the first patient agreed to go for prenatal diagnosis. And this patient went to UCL, to Dr. Mary Petro's lab, and the first prenatal diagnosis was done. From 1998 to 2002, about 66 families traveled to London for prenatal diagnosis. Of these, 16 were affected with thalassemia major. Fetuses were affected with thalassemia major. And they were all aborted. Luckily, in 2002, there was a backing from the religious groups from all the three schools of Islam that termination is allowed if it is before 120 days for thalassemia. And then suddenly there was an increase in number of families opting for prenatal diagnosis. And from 2002 onwards, on an average, we were sending 70 families abroad for prenatal diagnosis. And that was the time we felt that it is a time to start prenatal diagnosis in Dubai. And that was the beginning of prenatal diagnosis in UAE as such. After 9 years in government sector, I joined Canadian Specialist Hospital Dubai, and I was there for about 4 years. I was the founder, medical director, and also the director of laboratory. I started the first thalassemia daycare facility in this hospital, and also all the three sections of the genetic lab, and also prenatal diagnosis in the private sector. Thalassemia is also very common in the Mediterranean countries, and they had shown that with population screening, prenatal diagnosis, and genetic counseling, you can prevent the new births of children with thalassemia disease. At the time, the number of patients who are born to the Emirati Arabs were about 50 to 60 per year, almost one child per week. At one center, we had 700 patients with thalassemia major. Since the treatment for thalassemia is free for all patients in UAE, it was costing the government around 16 million dirhams. In those days, it was equivalent to 16 crore rupees. So something had to be done to prevent new births of children with thalassemia disease. The Ministry of Higher Education, His Highness Sheikh Nayan, and Her Excellency Dr. Mariam Attar, they understood the importance of population control program in UAE, and they started a project under the name of UAE Free of Thalassemia by 2012. It was started in 2007. By 2012, they wanted to decrease the number of births to almost to zero. His Highness himself led a countrywide campaign to spread the awareness about thalassemia disease and its prevention. And he also spread the message in universities and colleges, and this stimulated a lot of enthusiasm, and many students came forward for screening for thalassemia, and we collected the samples using mobile vans. We set up a central laboratory in Dubai, and that was the beginning of the National Thalassemia Screening Program in UAE. And I became the director of the laboratories, and I was with this organization for about 5 years. One of the important offshoot of this project was a premarital legislation in the country making thalassemia and sickle cell screening mandatory by law. Now, no marriages in UAE are approved by the court, whether it is for locals or expatriates, unless they go through screening for thalassemia and sickle cell, and they should also go through the counseling part. The another important offshoot of this project was setting up a high-end molecular genetics lab with the help of Professor Hathori, and we also started for the first time a student and technician exchange program between UAE and Japan. Management of thalassemia is not just blood transfusions and iron chelation with expensive medications. It is improving the quality of life of every patient and psychosocial support for patients as well as their families. This importance was realized, and at Dubai Thalassemia Center, we started giving a lot of attention to these areas. These are some of the file pictures. You can see the medical team to the Disney trip with the patients, a trip to the pilgrimage, celebrating the birthday of the patients in the center, group counseling sessions, public awareness in malls and in the schools. These are some of the activities that Thalassemia Center does other than taking care of clinical management of these patients. In summer of 2012, there was acute shortage of blood. One of the thalassemia patient tweeted His Highness, the ruler of Dubai, and telling the situation the thalassemia families are facing. In couple of hours, His Highness was in the center, interacting with the patients and the staff. And after that, he goes straight to the blood donation center and donates the blood. From that day onwards, there is no shortage of blood in the entire country for thalassemia patients. Just an example how leaders can influence a change. After successfully completing the Emirates Free of Thalassemia project, I was asked to join the private office of His Highness. He is the eldest Sheikh Sultan. He is the eldest son of the President of UAE, the current President of UAE. I became the Director of Planning and Operation for his organizations, and I was with him for almost 5 years. And what we did here was to replicate what we did in Dubai in rest of the countries. We set up multidisciplinary daycare facilities to cover both pediatric and adult patients. Thalassemia International Federation, which is based in Cyprus, they came to know the work that is going on in UAE. They approached His Highness for humanitarian help to help the neighboring countries to develop such centers. And that was the start of the first regional collaborating office of Thalassemia International Federation in Abu Dhabi. I was the head of operations from 2011 to 2016. I am no more the head of operations of regional office because I have other commitments to establish other genetic services in the Northern Emirates. But I'm still associated with Thalassemia International Federation in a different capacity. I'm one of the 7 medical advisors in TIF, and I am associated with the projects that happen in Middle East and Indian subcontinent. At present, we are working in Morocco, Mauritius, and also in India at CMC Ludhiana. I wanted to stop with this slide, but Professor Vijay Kapoor asked me to include few more slides. What message I can pass on to the students and young faculty? I can say about myself, when I was young, I always used to hear this phrase, follow your dreams, work hard, follow your passions. To tell you very frankly, this did not work for me. I wanted to be an engineer. I became a medical doctor because of pressure of my grandfather. When I finished my MBBS, I wanted to be a surgeon, but I became a pediatrician. I wanted to be a neonatologist. I became a geneticist. I had a high school teacher. When I joined medicine, he gifted me a copy of Gulliver's Travels. On the first page, he wrote these blessings. Let Almighty lead you to the peak of success. So I wanted to do something. Things did not happen. But when it did not happen, I accepted it as God's will and tried to, work hard and try to achieve success in that area. And Almighty has been very kind to me. Okay, in whatever I did, okay, I could succeed. This is what I can say to the youngsters, that sometimes it's good to dream, but sometimes dreams can materialize, sometimes they do not. But keep flowing. Whatever that comes, accept it and work hard. I'm sure you will also be successful at a later date. Professor Vijay Kapoor wanted me to say something what SGPGA can do even better than what it is doing now. I really don't know the ground situation of SGPGA, but what I hear from others is I don't think there is a central research laboratory in SGPGI. If it is there, please correct me. What I feel is technology gets outdated very fast, especially in the field of immunology and genetics. If you have a central research laboratory, there could be an easy access to costly equipments, easy access to technical expertise, and you can avoid equipment duplications. This will provide an atmosphere for a multidisciplinary research, and it can encourage residents to work with different departments. It's good to have a publication cell attached to a central research laboratory so that the team can help to review students and faculty members in publishing their scientific work. It's also nice to have a biostatistic and bioinformatics units attached to central lab so that experiments can be planned well and they can be concluded also well. This is my last slide, and I said what I can do to help SGPGI. I'm just recalling the discussion I had with Professor S.S. Agarwal on 2nd December 2013. That was the last day we saw him. We saw him in the morning, but he did not come for the gala dinner in the evening. But the discussion that happened during that morning, I'm just briefing you here. Professor Agarwal had come to Dubai and he has seen the Thalassemia Center in Dubai, and he knew what all I am doing in Dubai. He wanted such Thalassemia Center to be established in various parts of the country, especially in SGPGI. He was looking forward for a robust thalassemia control program, if not at a national level, at least at a state level. And he liked my proposal of setting up an MD program for thalassemia and hemoglobinopathies, because at present, thalassemia patients are taken care by hematologists or geneticists or pediatricians, and they cannot afford to give their full time and dedication to take care of this complex disease. What I can do is to help to set up a comprehensive care facility for thalassemia at SGPGI, and this could be the first in India. I can help to get accredited from TIFF as a Center for Excellence. I think with this, I will stop here. And once again, I thank Professor Dhiman, Professor Mishra, Professor Shubha, Professor Vijay Kapoor, and I see a lot of teachers, Professor Sita Naik, Professor Bhandari, okay, Professor Suraksha Agarwal. Thank you all for the wonderful time I had in SGPGI. Thank you.
Thank you, Naveed. I think it was good that you didn't join surgery, otherwise we would have had a very tough competition. So thank you for that. But Naveed is an example to show that how even in a very new discipline, which some of the skeptics, when this department was started, said that nothing would happen, you can achieve great heights. And Naveed, your suggestion to some extent has been already implemented. We now have a core lab where there is common equipment which can be used and shared by different departments. The last speaker for the day is Dr. Nagaraju, and I would now request Dr. Amita Agrawal, the head of the Department of Clinical Immunology, to introduce Dr. Nagaraju.
Good evening, friends. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Nagraju. And as you've seen, Dr. Naveed has shown you some of his pictures, and I would also like to share some of his pictures with you. Dr. Nagraju is chair of the Department of Pharmaceutical Sciences at Binghamton University, New York, currently. He received his bachelor's degree from the College of Veterinary Sciences in Tirupati and his master's degree from a prestigious IBRI, Izzat Nagar. He was also among the first batch of PhD students. He joined with Uma as the first two students in our department in 1989, and Dr. Naveed joined in genetics. After completing his PhD with Professor Sita Naik, he moved to NIH. There he worked with another legend, Professor Paul Plotz. And within a matter of short period of 4 years, he was appointed as a tenured faculty position at Johns Hopkins University in the Department of Rheumatology. His work in myositis is acclaimed all across the world. But he had different plans. So he moved with a geneticist, Professor Eric Hoffman, in CNMC, Washington, as an associate professor, and very soon became a full professor in the Department of Integrative Systems Biology at CNMC. He was also the director of the Research Center for Genetic Medicine. So he combined immunology and genetics to answer questions in both immunological diseases which affect the muscle, as well as genetic diseases which affect the muscle. And He's currently an expert in translational research in autoimmune and genetic muscle diseases. And on a personal note, I would like to add that Nagraj helped me learn lab immunology. I was absolutely a naive person, a clinician who didn't know anything about the lab. And Nagraj, Sunil Tabadgaon, Dr. Mishra, and I would spend hours in the lab learning together how to do lab experiments. I hope I can share the slides. And I think that time was a very great time. It was like a family feeling with support from Dr. S.S. Agarwal and Professor Sita Nayak. We used to just cook up something in the evening and have a dinner together. So it was a real great feeling, and Nagraj was a great support. So today, I request Nagraj to share his journey with us, since we are already running late. And Nagraj, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Yes, sir.
But you can hear me, right?
Yes, very well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Amita. And I also want to thank Dr. Dhiman and Dr. Kapoor, as well as the alumni cell for inviting me today. So some memories are not faded easily. If for whatever reasons, they get stuck in your brain for a very long time. One of those is a December evening when I showed up at the gate of SGPGI. So I came to SGPGI around, I think, 7:30. That was one of the last tuk-tuks I took from the railway station. So I was very tired after 2.5 days of travel, precisely 3 trains and 2 buses from my hometown Kadapa in Andhra Pradesh. For whatever reason, that evening was extremely cold. You know, for some of you, it may not be that cold. You all have to remember, in South, I only experienced 2 seasons, summer and very hot summer. Especially the luggage that I was carrying, the walk from the main gate to the PG hostel was probably one of the most painful short journeys I ever had. So I reached PG hostel. I did not see a single soul that night. And I waited for 10 minutes, and I didn't want to go back to Lucknow to find another hotel. And my tuk-tuk guy told me that's actually the last tempo. So those days, I think there were not many going back and forth between SGPGI and Lucknow. So within few minutes or so, I saw a guy walking around, coming towards the hostel, whistling. And that was Dr. Praveen Solanke, an SR in gastroenterology. I asked him, you know, I'm a PhD student and I'm here to find a room. He said, then there's nobody here in the night to allot a room. Your best chance is to go back to Lucknow or go back and ask at the PRA. So with all this luggage, I walked again towards PRA. And then there they told me that is only for the patient and relatives, not for people like me. So I determined not to go back to Lucknow. And there's actually no way to go back to Lucknow. So I came back to the PG hostel and finally found one of the PhD students and stayed that night. And this, I don't think this memory will ever fade. So next morning, at the time, this picture you have seen, this is the administrative block. The labs were temporarily set up in the administrative block, and I met Madam Naik and other faculty members, and they were all so wonderfully welcoming that pretty much took away all the tiredness and frustration I had the previous night. Again, you saw some of these pictures. These are the initial batch of PhD students, and actually photoshopped Siri Sinha here. So after joining, and one of the things that we planned to do was to open all this equipment with weird manuals. And the translation of Japanese to English is actually pretty terrible, very painful to read. At times I felt it's probably much easier to learn Japanese than reading this translation. I'm just not kidding, actually, it's pretty true. So anyway, at the end, we persevered. And I still remember, Madam Naik, you were there, probably you don't remember, and you stayed pretty late till 10 o'clock, setting up the RO water purification system. And that's one of the nights I remember, but you stayed very late. I haven't seen or heard about a faculty member staying that late and helping a student to set up all these things. That's very unique. And I still vividly remember, Madam Naik, that you helping me to set up the RO system. So what we learned from this experience is that there is no real substitute for perseverance in science. So we ultimately set up everything and made a very smooth running lab. So acquiring those traits really helped me to become a scientist in my career. So you can see here, and my colleague Uma, and there myself with my good friend Naveed, helping to practice next day seminars. The morning immunology genetics seminars were a nightmare for many. Partly, both Madam Naik and Dr. Agarwal and all the faculty came to these seminars. If you haven't prepared well, it's likely that you will fail this exercise of presenting whatever the journal club or seminar you are giving. What I remember most after these seminars, almost all of us went to a coffee break at the main cafeteria. This is especially the residents and clinical faculty before going to the OPD. These 10-20 minutes of coffee get together really helped to bond all of us in the department. So I also see Dr. Mishra here, and I have to confess, I was particularly scared of Dr. Mishra's questions in these seminars. So generally, most of Dr. Mishra's questions, they sounded very simple. As soon as he completed these questions, almost instantaneously you realize they are very difficult to answer because many of them have a very deep, and many of them are very deep and very astute. And what I particularly remember most, Dr. Mishra, after OPD, came back to the lab. And I truly had the privilege of going on his scooter to have a cup of tea at the Daba outside SGPGI. I got to know Dr. Mishra not only as an outstanding clinician, a superb scientist, an excellent teacher, more importantly, a wonderful human being. Thank you for all those wonderful memories you have created, Dr. Mishra. I think the founders, in our case, Dr. S.S. Agarwal and Madam Naik, they are truly the visionaries. How can you advertise a new institution with no history about its strengths? They organize these training workshops, and Madam was outstanding getting all these grants to set up CERC schools. I ended up participating in most of these And that's the first time I learned I do have a knack for teaching, and I do want to spend the rest of my career in academics. As you can see here, Madam Naik always invited all of us, especially PhD students. In general, PhD students are considered very low on the totem pole, but clearly not in the minds of Madam Naik or Dr. Subhash Naik. They always invited us. Not only invited, they made us extremely comfortable. As you can see some of these pictures, Madam really cooked wonderful dishes, and being a South Indian, she always prepared the best idli sambar. One of the things, if you carefully notice that the people who are eating, almost all of them are holding spoons. Being a South Indian, I never ate idli sambar with a spoon. I always mixed with my hand. I was hesitant. Madam Naik came to me, whispered in my ear, "It's fine to eat with hands." These acts of personalized caring, what makes Naiks unique and gifted mentors. Madam Parashar is one of those really warm, wonderful, welcoming people. I grew up in a small farming village, not very used to style, sophistication, or elegance in a farmhouse. Madam Parashar, apart from being a great scientist, teacher, mentor, and is a great host and a perfectionist. Every party she organized at her home. Tell you, I had multiple occasions, sometimes multiple times in a month, to enjoy Madam Parashar's wonderful, delicious dinners. And she always planned all of those meticulously and executed them meticulously. I had great time at SGPGI. I have to confess, I had an interesting reputation. Probably some of you know, but probably not many. So I learned about my own reputation one day when I was sitting at the cafeteria. One of our technicians, S.K. Dwivedi, came looking for me. He asked one of the cafeteria servers whether he has seen Dr. Nagaraju. So I was just sitting right close by, and the server told him, "Who is Dr. Nagaraju?" "I don't know him." So I heard this conversation and waved my hands, and Dwivedi looked at me. "Oh, that is Dr. Nagaraju." And then the server told him, "I know this guy. If you have asked whether he has seen a guy who is always surrounded by the girls, you should have answered correctly." I still don't know whether that was a good or bad reputation, but now realize how people perceive you and your actions, especially in public. As Dr. Naveed mentioned, he has been a great friend and continues to be a wonderful friend. He always invited us to his home for cooking. What united us at the time, because there were no restaurants existed nearby, is the opportunity to cook together, eat together, and bond together. So not having a restaurant nearby is not always a bad thing. It helped us to meet together. And here is one of those cooking sessions and eating sessions. As you can see, a couple of our good friends from radiology also at Naveed's home eating together. So, and you can also see I tried my best to impress my future wife with my cooking skills, but I can tell you this much, that effort utterly failed. As mentioned earlier, Madam Nayak and Dr. Nayak, mentoring was unique, holistic, and personalized. Folks at my home did not agree for my marriage with Rashmi, partly because she's a North Indian and they simply cannot talk to her. And they did not show up for my marriage. Madam Nayak and Dr. Nayak, along with few friends, effectively served as my side of the family for some of these rituals during this marriage. Their mentoring is unparalleled and very hard to emulate. Thank you, Madam Nayak, and eternally thankful to Dr. Subhash Nayak. You can see this first of my now more than 200 publications originated as SGPGI. Dr. Dhiman very elegantly mentioned that Dr. Subhash Nayak took a personal interest in teaching and coaching how to write, how to communicate orally. Those skills I learned, as you can see, they clearly helped me. So, Madam Nayak, I hope I haven't disappointed you with all these publications, and that started with you holding my hand and at times at your home, writing, rewriting my very first paper. I just want to talk a little bit about the science. William Harvey, a 17th century English physician, said it well. I'm not going to read this for you. The broader significance of research on diseases that affect an extremely small number of people. That has been my focus for the last 25 years. And primarily I pursued research on two diseases: inflammatory myopathies, for which cause is not known, and Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, for which cause is known. Some of the problems I try to think and address are simple and probably take several decades more to have some clarity. One of those, why autoimmune response to self-antigens failed to fully explain all the manifestations of the disease in inflammatory myopathies. When it comes to Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, what molecular pathways and genes are active before these children manifest symptoms? Often they manifest between 2 and 4 years. This is a genetic disease, a lot goes on much before. Understanding those have been one of the most exciting, satisfactory feelings for the last 25 years. I also tried to think and address, can one initiate and completely reverse symptomatic phase of the disease by simply controlling 1 or 2 genes? And this is experimentable in the animal models. Most recently, probably now almost a decade, the recent days, my lab has been involved in doing a lot of high throughput drug screening. And some of the things that we have identified in the lab, we wanted to move it to the clinic. One of the problems we faced was, especially in rare diseases, in order for any drug to go into people, you need to have a lot of preclinical evaluations, both efficacy and safety. But in rare diseases, nothing was established. So what happens when nothing exists? Somebody needs to take the lead. And many of us are experts at complaining that nothing exists. I chose.
Can you move your slides? Your slides are not moving.
I chose, thank you, Amita. I'm still on the same slide. I chose to address this in a different way. That is, to standardize methods for robust evaluation in the preclinical models. So the rigor is at the center of everything. So rigor, the essence of scientific work. So the efforts, along with the like-minded people that I made last 10 years, resulted in developing standard operating procedures and methods, how to evaluate a new therapeutic agent in any of these unique, rare animal models. The idea, as you can see from this picture, Leonardo da Vinci is an expert, almost 16 different fields. We are trying to be experts in one thing. How on the earth this one person can master and excel in this many things? The motto, if you carefully look at it, is constant rigor. Constant rigor is at the center of the 5 pillars of scientific work. That is logic, experimental redundancy, error analysis, intellectual honesty, and probability and statistics. There is a famous National Public Radio reporter, Richard Harris. He recently wrote a book called Rigor Mortis: How Sloppy Science Creates Worthless Cures, Crushes Hopes, and Wastes Billions of Dollars. I'm proud to say that I ended up in his book, spent 2 pages describing my own efforts of creating rigor in science. I will briefly describe one other scientific curiosity that I pursued and continue to pursue is glucocorticoids, and many of you know very well. So these 3 gentlemen won the Nobel Prize for creating cortisone and treating handful of patients at the time. This is one of the fastest Nobel Prizes in biology and medicine. They published the paper in 1949. They won the Nobel Prize in 1950. Even during that time, they realized long-term high-dose administration of glucocorticoids have multiple side effects. As you can see from this image, essentially, they don't spare any organ. And devastating side effects often make clinicians to play with the dose, increase and decrease. And that has been the norm for the last 70 years. In order to understand how glucocorticoids really work, how come they have both beneficial as well as devastating side effects, you need to understand the mechanism of action of glucocorticoids. I don't go into detail. Generally, cortisol diffuses into the cytoplasm, binds to these glucocorticoid receptors. Almost 12% of the 35,000 genes or so have GREs. Majority of the metabolic side effects of glucocorticoids are due to engaging GREs on these many genes. Whereas the beneficial effects are often to the binding to the monomer, that is a powerful NF-kappa B inhibitor, and some of this Glucocorticoids are also great membrane stabilizers. So the idea was, if this is that simple, can we make a ligand that simply binds to a monomer, does not engage a dimer? And as you all know well, there are multiple steroids. Some of them are more powerful with extremely powerful side effects. So in collaboration with John McCall, a really wonderful chemist, myself and Dr. Hoffman, we stumbled on what we call at the time EBP15 or vamorolone. Essentially, if you look at this, you don't have to understand any of this. This is prednisone structure, this is deflazacort, this is vamorolone. The only difference is these, you have 3 stumps here. In vamorolone, you have only 2 stumps. That is enough to dissociate the dimerization and also all the associated co-repressors and cofactors. A small change, less than 2.9 angstroms, has the ability to completely dissociate side effects from the beneficial effects. This is truly amazing. Where are we today? Started this company in 2008 called Reversion. Did till 2016 all the preclinical safety evaluations. We are almost at the end now, but by next year we should have a FDA decision if this drug works. And unlike majority of the academic people, you go and seek venture capitalists. Their interests are very different. We decided to pursue something called as a venture philanthropy model, raised around $60 million in non-dilutive funding. And we're almost there. In few months, we should know this experiment of 12 years is a fail or success. I also started another company called Agada Biosciences. Wear multiple hats. This is immensely enjoyable, partly because teaching, managing an academic department, and the problems that come with it are entirely different. Raising money, raising resources, trying to go through a path in which I was not trained, that is business. Serving both as CEO or the vice president of research for these companies really helped me to realize we all have potentials. Until you explore them, there is no way you can realize. The take-home message is, do not be scared of failure. Try and pursue your passion. As Navid said, he wanted to be an engineer, but still he ended up being a geneticist and a doctor. I'm not sure. I grew up in a farm. At the beginning stages, I wanted to be a veterinarian. So now I ended up being an immunologist in a lab. Not bad. I want to have this slide. This is what you are seeing is a relay, Olympic relay, 400 meters. Mentoring is simply passing the baton to the next generation of scientists. The runner finishing one leg is usually required to pass on the baton to the next runner while both are running in a marked exchange zone. And more importantly, and I want to again cite Madam Naik, I entered into this relay many times, strayed away and wanted to be away from the field. And Madam's unique mentoring brought me back into the field And I'm eternally grateful for that man. Now, I'm still in this relay, and these are all the people who made me to run this relay. And now I have trained over 112 people. So they are the ones entering in this relay. Unlike the actual relay in the field, this is a never-ending one. You simply pass on the baton. I want to end with 2 slides. The mentoring that Madam Naik has done, you can feel it when we approached some of the mentees that she is coming to the US. This was celebrating her birthday a few years back. Everybody was so enthusiastic, wanted to come and see Madam. See, for those who are young, Madam is the greatest example of a wonderful, caring mentoring that people want to be associated with her, see her, irrespective of how long the time has been. I will end with this, my last slide. As I said, I had a bad reputation of being surrounded by girls. Fortunately, I am still surrounded by girls. And I'll end this here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nagaraju. I think that's one of the best examples of the very long, very arduous, and at the same time very expensive journey of a drug discovery. In fact, it's just a drug modification, but still big achievement and the difficult journey. Thank you very much for sharing your journey with us. So with that, we come to the end of the 4 presentations. Once again, I would like to thank all the 4 speakers for sharing their journey with us. I'm sure all of you will agree with me that it was a very nostalgic moment, not only for you, those who have left the portals of the Institute, but even for us who are still here. Looking at those pictures from late 80s and 90s was a very nostalgic moment for all of us also. There are a lot of comments in the chat, most of them very greatly appreciating all the 4 presentations. So thank you all 4 of you once again from all the audience and from us. There are tributes specifically for Dr. S.S. Agrawal and Dr. Naik. There are a few comments and suggestions about teaching humanness and humanity. I must say that 01 courses, some courses do cover some of these aspects, including communication, patient safety. There is a comment about whether the institutions should be training people for the corporate sector. But I think if we take a broader view, it is that we are training people to provide healthcare to our people, whether it is in the government sector or private sector. And these days, the boundary between government and corporate sector is actually becoming more hazy, because most of the big corporate hospitals have a teaching program. They do research also. In fact, some of the corporate hospitals, I won't name, but they probably are doing much better research than some of the government institutions. So I don't think we need to differentiate between that. And as was highlighted by Dr. Puri, with so small contribution to healthcare by the government, corporate sector in India still plays a major role in providing healthcare. A few points which I have noted, and I would like to make a suggestion to Dr. Punita, since she's looking after the alumni cell now, that we must create an online directory of all the alumni, which should be live in the sense that people can make changes, especially about their current affiliation and contact details. It should also have a social aspect about their family and pictures. I'm sure the 1,000 alumni have more than 100,000 pictures which they can share, which all of us will be happy to have a look at. Some concrete suggestions which Dr. Ashutosh said about international observerships. So those of our alumni who are abroad and who are in positions of power, who are in positions of eminence, they can help our students and our young faculty to obtain observership, to obtain fellowships, to visit these institutions, and they can act as a link between our students and young faculty and centers abroad. So I think that is another area which we need to explore. We need to ask our alumni, those who are settled abroad, how and whether they would like to help in this. Also, as Dr. Dhiman already said, that the institute and the alumni should extend an open invitation to all the alumni that whenever they are in India, whenever they are in Lucknow, they should come and visit. And if possible, we should arrange an interaction between them and the related specialities. I'm sure the remaining 1,000 alumni have similar stories to share, which would be very inspiring, which would be very interesting. And to people like me, who have been part of this journey for more than 3 decades, it will be a matter of pride also that our alumni are doing so well. So with those comments, I would like to end. I should have thanked Punita for allowing me to do this, but I would not do that. In fact, I'm feeling very jealous and envious that why did I join this institute as a faculty? I should have joined as a student, and then I would have been counted as an alumnus of this prestigious institution. So thank you, Punita, for asking me to moderate this session. And to finish the formal proceedings, I would request Professor S.K. Mishra, the Dean of the Institute, to offer a vote of thanks. And after that, I'm told that we will have a small video which will keep running. So please watch that also. Thank you very much once again. Now we have come to the end after almost 3 hours. The initial plan was 2.5 hours. So first of all, thanks to all of you to stay out and to bear with the late timing we have. So before I go to the proper thanks to our alumni, I must thank all our senior faculty members who have joined. Some of them are former directors and some of them are superannuated for their blessings on this occasion. So I'll just name some of them. I might have slipped some of them, so I may be excused for that. So whatever I could recollect, Professor Bhandari is there, Professor S.P. Kaushik, Professor Sitarai, Professor Vijay K, Professor Suraksha, and Professor Ramnath Mishra, and Dr. Sadi Shikora. So I must thank you for being here on this occasion and give blessing our institute. And all the 4 alumni who are illustrious, not that others are not illustrious, that will definitely pick up in the next year, but they have really made their recommendations by their departments, so they picked up for this year. And no doubt they deserve that, and I'm sure the current alumni, current generation residents and the young trainees of this institute will definitely learn from them. So it's important also to know that they have suggested some of this way to go about it, how to develop a more close bonding of the institute along with the global alumni network. Vinay has just suggested some of this. We have summarized all those inputs and we will definitely take up as a post event to document it and how we should go about it. The director of the institute and the members of the academic board, we are thankful to them. They have accepted my proposal in the last academic board to set up this alumni cell and go ahead. It is just a beginning and we need your support. What is my personal vision is this alumni cell is just to support, but we want the alumni should develop a society and it is by them, for them, and for the next generation. In that spirit, I think I request all the alumni connected here to please think about that, how to form a society. And all of you know that in many of the overseas universities, there are beautiful programs for alumni and how they have done it actually, and how they manage their activities. So we want all inputs from all of you so that we can frame this for the guidelines for making alumni society, which should be disconnected from the institute. And though in the purpose suite, they were always in close touch, but this is not the routine affair of this things, of the institute. The alumni cell only help in getting the society close to the institute, some kind of licensing with that. All my faculty colleagues who have been really supportive of this initiative, who started preparation only very recently, and all the head of the department and the faculty colleagues have given us all the names and they collected all the addresses so that the small team of the alumni cell under the chairmanship of Punita has been able to prepare the way we have seen it today. The team at Alumni Cell, the medical illustration unit, telemedicine team, and the audiovisual team are very much been supportive, and what we see today is because of their hard work. At the end, I must say that now, what should be our next future? What is the future? What should we expect actually? I'll just share some of my vision. It's up to you how you want to take it forward, or what more input would like to give that, and the Alumni Cell will take it forward. What I feel is that Institute's Alumni Day should be held every year with more features added to it. You decide what features you want to add it actually. At the department level also, many departments are already doing some Alumni Day either biannually or annually, doing some of those courses. But that can be done with the current situation more frequently with this social media network and also this web-based video conferencing. What is more important is can we involve our alumni in our routine teaching program. So once in a while, organizing one lecture or at least every month or every alternate month, or demonstrating a skill, what is not so popular here, or that they have made their mark in the life, they can demonstrate our alumni. It's part of the kind of teaching program also we want that can be also taken into consideration by the department. I suggest that department should also maintain a role of alumni. Many departments, I see few departments, I think gastroenterology, I've seen they have a scroll, and we are also planning to make a scroll in our department, like, for example, alumni wall. And that kind of thing also, maybe the departments can think to keep it. And at department level also, it's easier to keep a network with alumni rather than at institute level. Of course, institute level also to be done, but that also needs support of the department. So I request all the department heads and also faculty members also take a look at it, how it can be done in a dynamic way. You can get a create portal by the alumni cell and see that this portal is dynamic, and also giving authority to all the alumni to upload whatever news and views or educational content in that. These are various ways we can really keep connected. Now, how can we some suggestions have come on how they support our trainees or the young surgeons and physicians of this country who are settled in overseas. There are many ways. Ashutosh has already commented few. There are other ways also we can do it. And without also shifting from a place, without any financial issues, we can also mentor through nowadays telementoring and all those things are coming up very well. So is it possible that to prepare a memorial in the campus to remember this alumni? So some of the ideas I shared with the Institute Administration and Alumni Cell, can you develop SGPGI Alumni Memorial Park, and with the contribution or some other source, we can make this thing, or maybe alumni can we contribute something, so we can make alumni park, and there is such kind of parks are existing in many of these overseas universities. So that really becomes a memory for whenever we pass by the park, we remember about the alumni. So these are the couple of ideas I had to share with you and with you all, especially alumni and the alumni cell to take it forward in the near future and consider it. Thank you again for staying with us. There is a small video after this. It is just a SGPGI 2020. It's just a video walkthrough. So just go through that if you have time.
Thank you, everyone. We'll play a small video. It's goodbye from SGPGI station. Hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.